Cool. All right. Thanks, guys. Have fun.
Thank you.
I decided to take my camera off since we were live streaming. Hi.
Hello.
What is your name, please?
My name? Casey.
Gotcha. Welcome, Casey. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Hi, Brendan.
Hi, how are you?
Just fine. Congratulations.
Yeah. There we go.
Hey, everyone. I know it's time to start, but we're missing a judge, and so we'll just hang.
Sounds good.
Hi.
Hello.
You must be Amy.
I am. Sorry. Getting my earbuds all set. Okay.
And Amy, you are our lead judge, so you'll be maintaining the round today.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I saw judge number 1. I thought that might be the case. Okay, fantastic. Let me just separate my tabs real quick. Okay, so we have Brennan here.
Here.
All right, awesome. Casey?
Here.
All right, Grace?
Hi, I just put a note in the chat for Grace. She is in a BP.
Oh, great.
Running late. Awesome.
Okay, awesome.
Hey, Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
Around running late. Okay, so what do we think here? Should we hang on? Should we hold out for Grace?
What did the chat say?
Should we wait for Grace to show up? No, she's double entered in around running late. Oh,
I would
okay.
say let's press on. That would be
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, awesome. Well, congratulations for making it to final rounds. Yay. Yeah, one of you I've had before, but I just want to give my little spiel that you should be very proud of yourselves for doing this. It shows that you are adaptable, and that is a skill that you're going to be able to continue to apply, especially as our world increasingly changes and we continue to use public speaking through a virtual format. So you should give yourselves a pat on the back. Congratulations for being here. And since we have Brennan and Casey here, I say we get started. I do appreciate nonverbals, especially with public speaking and affirmations. And since we can't hear each other, I do the sign language applause. So however we like to give positive affirmations, I say we move forward with that. And I know I could hear Brennan. Casey, do you want to do a quick soundtrack for us?
Hello.
Okay, awesome. All right. Well, I guess without further ado, go ahead and mute your mics if you're not Brennan. Brennan, I'm pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes. Yeah. Just let me know
Okay.
whenever you guys are ready to start.
All right. Sounds good. Well, let's give it up for Brennan.
It's 4:31 on a Tuesday afternoon in downtown Berlin, Germany. Commuters are beginning to board the S-Bahn train on their way home from work, but then masked men in large black bags are heading towards the train car, and this train is about to be bombed. But not with weapons, with paint, as the group creatively displays their logo 1UP across the side of the train car. One Up, or One United Power, is the largest graffiti group inside of Berlin. However, their reach spans across the globe, with this infamous group's iconography appearing in Europe, the United States, and even underwater. And according to an interview with Carthet magazine on September 26, 2016, OneUp's goal is not one of aesthetics, but one of placement, with the ultimate goal of placing their image and its message, which is fighting for artists to express themselves in authoritarian regimes across every visible surface, creating counterpublics. That is, discursive statements parallel to public arenas where groups invent and circulate counter-discourses to create oppositional messaging. And I was lucky enough to be able to see some of OneUp's artwork firsthand in Berlin, and it inspired me to research further, where I found that as their notoriety increases, OneUp frequently holds workshops for children in order to teach them how to use color and graffiti as a method of expression, and tests whether a global decentralized group can even have a consistent message, and whether they can unite many different groups under one cause, which leads us to our research question. How does OneUp use location-based counterpublics to create a message of dissidence? Today, we'll begin with a brief literature review, which will lead us to our model that will then apply to the artifact, and finally answer our research question. First, to our literature review. According to Robert Asson's August 2009 study on the counterpublics of a conservative counterintelligentsia, published in the Quarterly Journal of Speech, establishes an operational definition for counterpublics, which is any statements that belie claims of marginalization that either implicitly or explicitly widen or narrow the discourse for others. Meaning a counterpublic is a person or an organization that operates against the status quo, usually from the minority, and seeks to change the discourse for others. Second, Paul S.N. Lee's November 9th, 2015 study published in the Chinese Journal of Communication, which establishes that platforms like YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook make it easy for groups to become leaderless and homes for do-it-yourself politics, where groups will take traditional messaging frameworks and bend them to their will, creating oppositional messaging. Finally, Jin-Yong Kang's March 12, 2019 study on civil inattention through the internet, published in the Quarterly Journal of Speech, which establishes that the internet's architecture makes it easy for a counterpublic to enter and draw attention from the broad public, but much more difficult for them to create barriers that prevent further encroachment, meaning it's easy to get attention online, but much more difficult for someone to control that message once it's been seen by the general public. This then leads us to our model, which is Location Matters, The Rhetoric of Place and Protest, by Daniel Endres and Samantha Senda Cook, published in the Quarterly Journal of Speech in August 2011, and establishes that the reconstruction of place can be considered a rhetorical artifact when combined with other forms of counterpublic speech. Now that we've introduced our model, we can now apply it to the artifact using its three tenets, which are place as meaning, place as rhetoric, and pre-existing meaning. First, for place as meaning, which Andres defines as using a location's contrast between high and low value targets. OneUp does this by having a consistent and omnipresent style throughout their artwork across the globe. Because according to a Vice Media documentary on April 12th, 2019, OneUp's style is the same everywhere they go, allowing them to target high value targets, such as Berlin's subway car system, which is high value due to its ease of access and the visibility to the general public. However, in order to create contrast, OneUp will also target run-down spaces in order to create symbols of unlikely alliance between different socioeconomic classes. Second, place as rhetoric, which Andres defines as using a location's official signage, messaging, or location to amplify one's overall message. OneUp does this by targeting Berlin's transit system, which according to an in-person interview on March 12, 2018, OneUp explicitly targets these trains due to their explicit signage and message of control. These trains are sparkling clean and guarded by many plainclothes officers. And by targeting these trains, they can show people that not everything is gray, covered by security, and watched by police, as said by a leading member of the group, identified as Selena, in the aforementioned Vice Media interview. Finally, pre-existing meaning, which Andres defines as using a location's pre-existing meaning to amplify messaging. OneUp does this in two main ways. First, by traveling to Syria to highlight fissures in the region caused by civil war, and second, using the ocean to call for increased environmental protection. First, according to the aforementioned Vice Media interview, OneUp traveled to Syria in order to teach kids how to paint. Now, we think of Syria as a repressive and war-torn country. However, OneUp's artwork is bright, colorful, and represents ideas of freedom of expression. This contrast allows their artwork to gain further traction online, allowing their message to outlast the physical artifact. Second, OneUp created the first ever 3D coral reef underwater graffiti, published to their Instagram on January 11th, 2019. Now, OneUp didn't vandalize a coral reef in order to make this. They actually grew this coral reef from the seafloor up into the shape of their logo. And by using the ocean as a place that many believe should be protected to amplify their message, with the ultimate goal of having their message of coral reef protection outlast the physical artifact. Now that we've applied our model to the artifact, we can now answer our research question. How does OneUp use location-based counterpublics to create a message of dissidence? First, for places meaning, OneUp utilizes places meaning by moving the discussion online, allowing their artwork to outlast the physical artifact. And according to Robert Assen, cited previously in our literature review, since OneUp's artwork seeks to explicitly widen the discourse about securitization and privacy, it is considered counterpublics. And by posting large and bombastic social media posts online, they amplify their message even further, allowing their message to outlast the artifact if it ever was destroyed. Second, place as rhetoric. OneUp utilizes place as rhetoric by having a strict organizational structure, because according to the aforementioned Vice Media interview, in order to stop trains and spray them with paint, it requires 15 to 20 people working on very strict timetables with very little margin for error, meaning that without this strict organizational structure, OneUp would fail to use Berlin's subway car systems for their rhetoric. Finally, pre-existing meaning. While not the focus of the documentary published by Vice on April 11th, 2016, OneUp's iconography was found in tar towns large and small across Syria, showing that their message is resonating with the people living there, and due to its contrast with the region, amplifies their message, allowing it to outlast the physical artifact. So today, we've conducted a brief literature review, which led us to our model that we then applied to the artifact and finally answered our research question. Graffiti is seen as something to be covered up and criminalized. However, a group from Berlin is radically reshaping that idea. And while they come from different backgrounds, ethnicities, and even languages, they all have one thing in common, They are one united power.
Redo that. Also, I just want to apologize for being a little late. Of course, I was closing opposition in a BP round, so sorry.
No worries. Yeah, that was put in the chat, so you're totally fine. Glad you
Perfect.
made it.
Thank you.
I'm double entered. May I be excused to my next event?
You may.
Thank you. Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.
Good luck.
All right. So, up next, we have Casey.
This is a dime. Clearly, everybody knows that. But if you look even closer, you can find the initials JS. This represents John Sinnock, who is credited with sculpting the profile of the 32nd president of our dime. But did he? This historical reference speaks to an issue that has long been status quo. It's not any news that women have been underrepresented in a number of career choices, whether it's a lack of representation in politics, government positions, high-level business, and heck, even the kitchen, as male chefs outnumber female chefs. So, where can women get a foothold? How about the art world? Let's look into ArtNet News from February 19, 2019. Researchers examined the gender diversity of more than 40,000 artworks in collections of 18 museums across the United States. They found that 87% of the collections are made by men, continuing the gender disparity and the misrepresentation of female artists throughout museums, galleries, and auction houses. This institutionalized rhetorical stance has perpetuated the lack of female representation in the art world. It continually suppresses female inclusion, leaving women to ask, where can we be appreciated? Therefore, it is important that we ask the research question: how does institutional rhetoric suppress the value of female artists within the United States? As we look forward onto the future of women's representation in society, we will look through this through a negative space. And this negative space is what we will be examining through institutionalized rhetoric. So today, we will define institutional rhetoric through a literature review, which will lead us to our model, apply our model to our artifact, and ultimately answer the research question. First, let's look onto our literature review. Josh Boyd's March 8, 2017 article, published by the International Encyclopedia of Organizational Communication, defines institutional rhetoric as allowing organizations to speak with a single voice through the emphasis of institutional image and the support of the institution's publics. Although it enables interactions and public dialogue, it can pose challenges for individuals in areas of accountability and representation. For instance, Larry David Smith's May 22, 2009 article, published in Communication Studies. He evaluates the oratory of the Republican National Nominating Convention of 1988. They suggested that Republicans were able to achieve their institutional traditional objectives through continuity and expansion. Lastly, Elisa Karen's June 19, 2007 article, published in the Quarterly Journal Speech. She analyzes end-of-life decision-making in United States hospitals. Currently, the hospitals have institutional control, yet it is the patients that should be able to tell their story and to push further the discussion with emotional and intellectual motives. Based off these three previously mentioned studies, I've chosen an appropriate model that combines the conclusions of these articles with the concept of institutional rhetoric to serve our institutional goals. Mark Thompson's article, Now You're Making It Up, Brother, Paul Robinson, HUAC, and the Challenge of Institutional Narrative Authority, published in the Quarterly Journal Speech on March 27, 2019. This model demonstrates the constructing of institutional goals to establish our own version of events. Now that we look through a literature review, which led us to our model, let's apply our model to our artifact. There are three tenets we can get from our model: narrative authority, value hierarchy, and disrupting a narrative. In her first tenet, narrative authority, Mark Thompson defines it as relying on both control of the story points and control over the context in which these story points are made meaningful. Curators today further have control of the institutional narrative presented to the public as they organize temporary exhibitions and arrange for traveling shows that enhance or extend the primary mission. Curation offers an opportunity to confront the lack of diversity in the arts by addressing issues of gender, race, and sexuality that is often pushed off to the side. What is even more surprising is that disparity is not always the result of innocent ignorance. According to New York Magazine from June 30th, 2009, they conducted an analysis of a 2006 exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. At the end, only 14% of the artists were women. This was after they said they were going to rethink their installations and investigate multiple narratives. The museum, by acknowledging the issue, was obviously aware of the problem. However, decades of feminist critique meant very little in this situation. In our second tenet, value hierarchy, which means the presentation or arrangement of elements in a way that implies importance. Even though collectors stress that gender isn't considered when putting a price on artwork, there are complex factors at play when deciding on something's value. According to a September 2019 investigation by Artnet News, data was gathered by international auctions and the leading art galleries in the United States. They found that more than $196 billion has been spent on art at auction between 2008 and 2019. Of this, women's work only counts for 2% of that. Lastly, in our final tenet, disrupting the narrative, a primary strategy in which the rhetoric is narrating another story within the main storyline. There are different women's arts organizations that are working tirelessly to carry their mission to level out the playing field. One of the most famous activist groups in the art world are the Guerrilla Girls. One of their most famous posters states, "Do women have to be naked to get into the Met Museum?" And the following statistic. They undermine the mainstream narrative by revealing the understory, the subtext, the overlooked, and the downright unfair. The National Association of Women's Artists has taken quite a lot of action by breaking the initial narrative presented to the public, promoting culture, education, and awareness in the visual arts by women in the United States. Additionally, a March 1st, 2017 article published by the National Museum of Women, they've been asking this question: can you name 5 women's artists? On social media each March during Women's History Month using the hashtag 5women'sartists. The campaign called attention to the lack of awareness we know about women's artists and aims to move from awareness to action. Now we've applied our tenets to our model, we can finally answer our research question, which was, how does institutional rhetoric suppress the value of female artists within the United States? The first reason are the curators themselves. Believing that female work is less valuable than men, there's not only no incentive to include work by women, it's thought to be detrimental and drive down the cost of the rest of the collection. Another issue rises from the sisterhood from February 8th, 2016. Art curator Adrian Seal critiqued an all-female exhibit in New York called Champagne Life, and his opening remarks stated, "It's hard to see the point of this flat, gimmicky exhibition that lumps together 14 women's artists." Secondly, we need to look into lack of awareness we know about women's artists from past and present generations. Notable philosopher John Stuart Mill suggested that we tend to accept whatever is as natural. In this case, in the field of art history, the male viewpoint is unconsciously accepted as the viewpoint of the art historian. As the audience becomes more aware of the male-centric viewpoint presented to them, they realize that this viewpoint is unnatural and could lead to the exploitation of women's artists. In order for women to achieve excellence, not just in art, society needs to provide opportunities and support. Although the pursuit for gender equity has made advances in recent years, underrepresentation still exists in many female pursuits. So today, we define institutional rhetoric through a literature review, which led us to our model, applied our model to our artifact, and ultimately answered the research question. So, who really did design the dime? It was actually Selma Burke, who was wrongly miscredited for the design of the dime in our institutionalized society. However, like Selma, we need to look onto the facts of the situation without pity and take with emotional and intellectual commitment to create a world in which equal achievements will not only be made possible, but actively encouraged by social institutions.
All right. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Okay, and Grace, I think I could hear you before, but do you want to give a quick sound check?
Test, test, test.
Fantastic. All right. Well, without further ado, let's see it for our third speaker, Grace.
On March 30th, 2018, at least 15 unarmed Palestinians were murdered by bullets fired from Israeli snipers during protests at the Israeli blockade near Gaza. According to The Intercept, one of the dead was Abdul Fattah Abdul Nabi. He was 19. The company that supplied the bullets that killed those innocent people is called Sierra Bullets and is owned by a man named Warren B. Kanders. Kanders sits on the board of the Whitney Museum of American Art. In response to Kanders' colonial profiteering, Decolonize This Place carried out a series of protests spanning over 9 weeks, according to Hyperallergic on July 25, 2019. The Whitney Museum protest called for museum board members like Kanders to live up to the standards the museum espouses as part of a broader project to decolonize the art world. And because the Whitney is known for its art that critiques both institutional and structural violence in the US. With all of this on the line, we must ask the research question: how do the Whitney Museum protests utilize curatorial practices to further a project of decolonization? To aid us in answering this question, we will look to Ivana Bago's article titled Dematerialization and Politicization of the Exhibition, Curation as Institutional Critique in Yugoslavia during the 1960s and 70s, published in the 2014 Museum and Curatorial Studies Review. This model provides a unique frame because it highlights the power of curation in museum spaces. So today, let's decolonize this place and analyze Bago's model, apply it to the Whitney Museum protests, and draw implications. Because art museums should practice what they paint. Board members included. Ivana Bago analyzed artists turned curators in Yugoslavia. These activist artists challenged galleries through 3 tenets: exhibition as critical intervention, decommodification of art, and political potentials of curation. First, exhibition as critical intervention. Zemimir Kostovic set up what is known as the Imaginary Museum, which consisted of objects taken from storage spaces of several Zagreb museums. Bago explains that objects can be selected and presented in any number of ways that depend entirely on the biases of the curator and the demands in the moment. Objects in the Imaginary Museum were originally rejected from being displayed in museums. Kostovic gave these objects a place, which forced visibility to an otherwise invisible aspect of the art experience. Second, decommodification of art. Bago argues that capitalist art markets force artists to adopt a for-profit mentality. This leads to co-optation and pulls focus away from the messages behind the art and commodifies it to preserve the integrity of the capitalist art market. This pushes corporate catering in the art world instead of art as freedom of expression and form of protest. Third, political potentials of curation. Bago focuses on the deconstruction of roles between artist and curator, combining those roles to challenge common practices in their time. Bago elaborates. Instead of advocating for artist-curator dichotomies, we should instead advocate for a total interrelationality between these two roles, which ultimately means a critical deconstruction of both. Working together was crucial in breaking down barriers to innovation and change. The protesters became curators of the Whitney, dictating how the public should perceive displayed art, It is time to apply Bago's model to the Whitney Museum protests. First, exhibition as critical intervention. To foreground the relationship between Canders and the Whitney, protesters placed a sculpture of a giant tear gas canister resembling those produced by Canders companies and used at the US southern border, at the Whitney's entrance, as well as Canders' apartment. Then, protesters created banners that displayed the names of every place impacted by Canders' weapons. The protesters turned the front steps of the Whitney into their own exhibition, utilizing curatorial practices. The protester exhibition was critical to the intervention of Canders' involvement on the Whitney's board. Second, decommodification of art. Canders attempted to gain cultural capital by supporting the Whitney in spite of his financial connections to the production of weapons. To center the commodification of suffering, protesters burnt sage in the Whitney's lobby, meant to mirror the tear gas that Canders was profiting from, according to ArtNet News on December 10, 2018. Moreover, protesters linked their critique to the $25 admission fee charged by the Whitney. This forces the museum to question whether or not to lower prices and decommodify art or risk co-optation and emptiness in their works. Third, political potentials of curation. The dissonance between Canders' companies and works at the Whitney only grew. As Forbes reports, on July 25, 2019, 8 artists participating in the Whitney Biennial joined protesters and, in a form of curatorial protest of their own, withdrew their submissions. One group of artists from London even created a short video using disturbing footage of a protester in Palestine getting shot. Art critic Blake Gopnik of the New York Times, in a July 21, 2019 NPR article, stated that those artists who withdrew from the biennial created excellent works of political art. Artists and protesters denounced Canders' toxic philanthropy and used the political potential to curate a movement to protest Canders and his companies. Having analyzed Bago's model and applied it to the Whitney Museum protests, we can return to our research question. How do the Whitney Museum protests utilize curatorial practices to further a project of decolonization? The protesters became curators of spaces both in and around the Whitney through sculpture, dance, and other art forms that brought those impacted by Canders' weapons to the foreground. They removed a colonizer profiting from suffering from his curatorial role. There are 2 implications: multiple rhetorical curations and challenging career versus cause mentality. First, according to ArtNet News on June 25, 2019, the protests involved multiple rhetorical curations of the Whitney from varying marginalized groups. Protests ranged from individuals burning sage to cleanse the air to a samba beat bursting from a portable speaker, according to the Paris Review on March 22, 2019. Moreover, the tear gas sculpture stood as a testament to those gassed at the border, as well as in Ferguson and Standing Rock. This rhetorical technique can be used by protests in abolishing legacies of colonialism because it allows people from different cultures to engage in the protest. Groups are brought together through multiple rhetorical curations. Decolonization of the art world requires diversity, and groups are able to demonstrate their unique suffering and make it visible. This prioritization of shared values allows for an intersectional approach to these protests. Second, challenging career versus cause mentality. A career versus cause mentality implies that the furthering of one's career or becoming someone in a position of power outweighs a cause. The career of Canders was not aligned with the works at the Whitney, and his career did not outweigh the cause of so many different groups fighting against modern colonialism. Organizers and participants of these protests forced a redirection in line with artistic values in spite of career outcomes. This rhetorical critique can be used to raise the unacceptable norms and examine the ethical implications of having someone like Canders support institutions that spread messages directly in conflict with finance or profiteering. Decolonization replaces money at the heart of the issue. the ethics behind institutions can be raised in place of hypocrisy. Today, we analyzed Bago's model, applied it to the Whitney Museum protests, and addressed implications. The protests exposed Kanders and his companies, ultimately forcing him to resign from the board of the Whitney in what Andrea Scott of The New Yorker on July 31st, 2019 described as the power of artists. However, Decolonize This Place reminds us on July 25th, 2019 that this goes beyond Kanders to the decolonization of an entire system. Although the road ahead may be long, what the Whitney Museum protests accomplished is nothing short of a work of art. Thank you.
All right. Well, once again, congratulations. These were awesome to hear. Thank you for enlightening all of us. Wishing you the best for your other rounds if you have any left. And maybe we'll see you soon.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. I
luck.
really like that this round was like all art speeches too. So
I know. It was so good.
it's very cool. All right. Thank you for judging.
Thank you.
Thank you.